Most gardeners think the solution to weak soil is more compost, so they build bigger piles, haul in more manure, spread 2 or 3 inches every season, and then, wonder why their beds still dry out fast, compact by midsummer, and need constant feeding just to keep yields stable. Or the problem isn't effort. The problem is that compost alone doesn't create permanence. It feeds soil, sure, but it doesn't build long-term structure. The method I'm talking about today beats every compost pile, not because compost is bad, but because this approach creates soil that keeps improving for decades. And if you're serious about long-term productivity instead of seasonal rescue missions, this is where you need to focus. Subscribe now if you want soil strategies that compound over time, instead of resetting every spring. What I'm talking about is the controlled use of charged biochar, the same carbon-based material that made the ancient soils of Terra Preta in the Amazon rainforest so durable that they remain fertile centuries later. Those soils weren't just compost-heavy. They were engineered with stable carbon built directly into the profile. Compost feeds soil, but biochar anchors it. Let's be clear. Compost is essential. I use it constantly, but compost decomposes. That's its job. Microbes consume it, nutrient cycle and volume shrinks. In hot or wet climates, you can lose a surprising percentage of organic matter in a single year. That's why beds sink over time. Biochar doesn't behave that way. Properly made biochar is mostly stable carbon. It resists rapid decomposition. It doesn't disappear in 3 seasons. Instead, it acts as a long-term framework that supports microbial life and nutrient retention year after year. When I rebuilt one of my oldest raised beds, I split it in half. One side received my standard routine, 2 inches of compost worked into the top 8 inches. The other side received compost plus about 12% biochar by volume, fully charged before incorporation. After 3 growing seasons of tomatoes, peppers, and brassicas, the compost-only side required heavier feeding to maintain leaf color. The biochar side held nutrients longer and retained moisture better between irrigations. The difference wasn't dramatic in week 3, it was obvious in year 3. Most gardeners ruin biochar before it ever helps. Here's where people get it wrong. They toss raw charcoal into their beds and expect immediate results. That can backfire. Fresh biochar has enormous adsorption capacity. If it's empty, it will pull nutrients from the surrounding soil solution, especially nitrogen. I never apply it uncharged. My standard method is simple. I crush the biochar so most pieces are under ½ an inch. Fine particles are good, massive chunks are not. Then I soak it for at least a week in a nutrient solution. Sometimes that's compost tea, sometimes it's diluted urine at about 1 part urine to 10 parts water. Other times I mix biochar directly into finished compost at a 1:1 ratio by volume and keep it moist for 3 to 4 weeks. The goal is saturation, every pore preloaded with nutrients and microbes before it ever hits the soil. If you skip that step, you're setting yourself up for short-term deficiency. In a standard 4x8 raised bed that's 12 inches deep, you're working with roughly 32 cubic feet of soil. If I'm targeting 10% biochar in the top 8 inches, I'll incorporate around 3 cubic feet of charged biochar evenly into that upper layer. I mix it thoroughly using a broad fork and rake, not just scratching it into the surface. In a 100 square foot in-ground garden plot, I aim for roughly 1 cubic foot of biochar per 10 square feet to reach about 10% in the top 6 inches. That's about 10 cubic feet total, blended with compost before incorporation. You don't need 20 or 30%. In fact, that can create excessive drainage in already sandy soils. 5 to 15% is the functional range in most situations. Raised beds show the difference fastest. Raised beds drain quickly. That's a benefit for root health, but it also means nutrients wash through easily. Before using biochar, I had to fertigate more aggressively during peak fruiting stages just to keep heavy feeders satisfied. After integrating 10 to 15% charged biochar, I reduced nitrogen inputs by roughly 15 to 20% without yield loss. Irrigation intervals stretched slightly longer during hot stretches. Blossom end rot decreased in one bed, likely due to more consistent calcium availability tied to steadier moisture. And something less obvious happened. The soil stopped collapsing. Compost-heavy beds shrink as organic matter breaks down. Biochar, amended beds maintain structure better because stable carbon remains in place. Hydroponic growers can benefit too if they're thoughtful. Pure deep water culture systems don't need biochar floating in solution, but media-based hydroponics absolutely can benefit from it. In a cocoa coir and perlite blend, I replaced about 10% of the volume with fine, charged biochar. The result was improved buffering. EC spikes after feeding were less sharp. Roots colonized the char particles, creating a more stable rhizosphere. In wicking beds, adding a 1 to 2 inch layer of charged biochar above the reservoir improved capillary movement and reduced the sharp moisture gradient between saturated bottom layers and drier topsoil. It's not magic. It's increased surface area and cation exchange capacity working in your favor. This is about carbon architecture, not just fertility. The ancient builders of Terra Preta weren't chasing quick yield boosts. They were integrating charred biomass, organic waste, and minerals into soil in a way that created lasting fertility. Modern gardening culture tends to focus on correction. Yellow leaves, add nitrogen. Poor fruiting, add phosphorus. Low vigor, add compost. Those responses aren't wrong, but they're reactive. Biochar shifts the focus from correction to construction. When you build stable carbon into your soil, you're creating habitat that, well, actually persists. Microbes establish themselves, nutrients stick around longer, moisture fluctuations soften, and over time, the whole system becomes a lot more resilient. There are trade-offs, and honestly, they matter. Biochar isn't a universal cure-all. In heavy clay soils, too much can increase drainage faster than you might expect. In that case, start closer to 5% by volume and monitor carefully. If your soil is already extremely rich in organic matter and well-structured, immediate benefits may be, well, a bit subtle. Biochar shines most clearly in sandy, depleted, or heavily leached soils, and quality really matters. Never use charcoal briquettes. Avoid treated wood. Clean, untreated biomass only. If you're making your own, ensure a low oxygen burn and, complete quenching. Crush it thoroughly before charging. Used carelessly, biochar can disappoint. Used correctly, it compounds. What I've seen over multiple seasons is this. The biggest difference shows below ground. When pulling crops from biochar amended beds after 2 or 3 years, root systems are thicker and more branched. Soil aggregates cling together instead of crumbling apart. Earthworm populations increase even without deliberate inoculation. Drought stress appears later in the season. Nutrient deficiencies are less frequent between feedings. Fertilizer efficiency, well, it improves. None of that is flashy. It's steady, durable improvement. This method beats compost piles because, honestly, it works with them. I still compost aggressively, I still add organic matter every season, but I no longer rely on compost as the structural backbone of my soil. Compost is food, biochar is infrastructure. Together they create a system that strengthens instead of shrinks. If you're tired of rebuilding beds every year, tired of watching soil sink and fertility fade, start with one controlled experiment. Amend one bed with 5 to 10% charged biochar integrated into the top layer. Leave another bed on your standard routine. Track irrigation, fertilizer input, and yield for at least 2 full seasons. Serious growers don't guess. they test. If you care about building soil that outlives trends, subscribe to the channel and maybe share this with another gardener who's ready to move beyond seasonal fixes. The more we focus on durable soil systems instead of quick amendments, the better our harvests and our land become year after year.